Everyone, please silence your cell phones. The Fort Bend ISD Board of Trustee meeting is an open meeting for the public to observe the board conducting district business. Therefore, patrons may only address the board during the designated audience item section on the agenda. If you have printed material you want to give the board members, you must provide them to the board recording secretary, Gary Rozier.
You are muted.
Or to me, and we will provide them to the board. We also ask that members of the audience be respectful of others by remaining socially distanced from each other, wearing a disposable or cloth face covering over your nose and mouth at all times, and remaining quiet so that everyone is able to hear the proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you. The time is now 6:02 p.m. and this meeting is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum and the meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. At this time, I would ask that you all please rise for the pledges of allegiance and
You
remain
have been muted by the meeting host and cannot unmute yourself. You have been muted by the meeting host and cannot unmute yourself. Today's
Pledge of Allegiance is being led by Oman Khandra from Clements High School.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor to the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you. If you all could please remain standing for a silent invocation. Thank you. You may be seated. All right, first on the agenda are information items. We are starting with the student achievement update.
It's recognitions.
Oh, sorry, recognitions? I didn't get the recognitions. You have recognitions?
No, Veronica.
Okay, I'm sorry. Next up is Veronica Sofer with recognitions.
Thank you. Dr. Dupree, members of the board, first we'd like to thank Aman Kamdar, who is a senior at Clements High School. As you mentioned, he did our Pledge of Allegiance and our state pledge. He is the president of the Clements DECA Club. He is an active volunteer at his church and is currently the student worker in the communications department. He's doing a phenomenal job here in Fort Bend ISD. He also interned at our purchasing and information technology department. So he is really getting hands-on learning in Fort Bend ISD. Thank you for being here this evening to do our pledges. Moving on, I'd like to congratulate Dulles High School Orchestra. They were awarded second place in the American Prize Ernest Beacon Memorial Award for the performance of American music, Youth Orchestra Division. Their director, Michael Isidore, won third place award for conducting with the community orchestra. 5 Fort Bend ISD orchestras received national recognition as winners in the 2020 Mark of Excellence Project, a nonprofit organization sponsored by Foundation for Music Education. So the Mark of Excellence National Orchestra honors go to Austin High School, Kamircha Orchestra, directors Ann Victor and Zoran Yazmak. I think there are pictures up there. From Dulles High School, the Honor String Orchestra, directors Michael Isidore and Angela Yip. And a congratulations to Dulles Middle School Symphony Orchestra, directors Sally Kirk and Edward O'Day. Let's give them another round of applause. Our commended winners were Garcia Middle School Full Orchestra director Francis Wibberpaul, Giovanni Fuentes, Nicole Ellis, and Joel Shavira. So congratulations to Garcia Middle School. And then Austin High School Symphony Orchestra directors Ann Victor and Ryan Demkovich also were recognized as commended winners. So another round of applause for Austin High School. Moving on, we have Dulles High School Student Council, and they were recognized by the Texas Association of Student Councils for the following 2019-2020 awards. Their awards included Outstanding Student Council, Drugs, Alcohol, and Safety and Healthy Awareness, Energy and Environment, Pride and Patriotism, Community Service, and Sweepstakes. So great job to Dulles High School Student Council. And then also a big round of applause for the Fort Bend ISD Communications Department. We earned 9 2020 National School Public Relations Awards, recognizing our efforts in producing various communications for our programs, including the Award of Excellence, which is one of the most prestigious national awards we can win, for the Fort Bend ISD COVID-19 information for Fort Bend families, an Award of Merit for Goodnight Fort Bend, our social media videos that we produced, and along with 7 other honorable mentions. So we had a very full year, and the National School Public Relations Association recognized Fort Bend, so we're very proud to represent them. And then a huge recognition to Jim Rice, our Board of Trustee member, who was elected president of the Texas Association of School Boards Board of Directors. Mr. Rice has held several board positions with TASB. He is a strong advocate in public education and works for the benefit of FBI students and staff and all students and staff across the state. So we're very proud of him. And that public relations blast from TASB went out recently, and we were very proud to see so many people congratulating him and thank him for his service. Thank you, Mr. Rice.
Mr. Rice, please stand. Mr. Rice, please stand.
And another outstanding recognition this evening. We have Ms. Janet Menzie here with us this evening. She is our choir director at Clements High School. You'll remember she was our Teacher of the Year in Fort Bend ISD, and she was chosen as the Region 4 Secondary Teacher of the Year. So they would like to say a few words, and today we have Christy Hernandez, the Chief Officer of Communication and Administrative Services from Region 4, and she's going to share some information about Ms. Menzie.
Thank you, members of the board, Dr. Charles Dupree, and guests. It's a privilege to have this opportunity to publicly announce and to celebrate with you the selection of Miss Janet Menzie. Sorry. Is that better? Yeah, there we go. The selection of Miss Janet Menzie as the 2020-2021 Region 4 Secondary Teacher of the Year. Every year, the Texas Association of School Administrators facilitates the Texas Teacher of the Year program, which recognizes regional teachers of the year for their outstanding leadership and excellence in teaching. This year, the Region 4 Teachers of the Year program, we recognized 79 outstanding teachers from 39 districts and 1 charter school from throughout our 7-county area, which has more than 76,000 teachers. I mean, that is a huge accomplishment. 2 of the teachers, we select 1 elementary teacher and 1 secondary teacher, were selected as the Region 4 Teachers of the Year, and Ms. Menzie then represented us in the state competition. In appreciation of the work that you do, Ms. Menzie, with your students every day, we are excited to present with you these small tokens of our appreciation for all the work that you do. We have a desk chair for you. We have a laptop computer. And of course, the best of them all, we have the snazzy Region 4 bag for you. You truly exemplify excellence in teaching, and on behalf of Region 4, I am honored to join your board and the superintendent in recognizing you for this achievement. We're so proud of you. Again, I just want to say you should be so proud of yourself to be selected as the Region 4 Secondary Teacher of the Year. That's an amazing, amazing accomplishment. So just congratulations and thank you for everything you do. I forgot to mention, we have her Star Award. We usually award the Star Award the night of the Teacher of the Year event, which we held virtually and saved for this occasion. So we have her Star Award for her, too, that she'll get to keep. Oh, yes.
We're going to get together for a picture. So you've got your marks. We're going to separate just a little bit, so we'll take the picture from a little column and show you a phone number.
Is that the last one, Veronica? Yeah, we're going to pause.
You
Yes,
are
sir, that
unmuted.
concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sofer. We're going to take a quick break. We're having some technical difficulties to allow our technical staff to fix the current issues that we're having.
Have we confirmed with them if they can hear?
Ms. Drew and Ms. James, could you give us a wave just to confirm and just say hello to everybody? All right. So I see Ms. Drew can hear. Doesn't look like Ms. James can hear us. Okay, now she says thumbs up. Okay, all right, baby shark, got it. All right, let's we lost a couple board members. Just one? Oh, that's right, Jason's not here. I see the empty space.
Gabrielle is giving a bad signal.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So I think it was the host blocking me. So maybe I think we're good. Thank you.
Ms. Drew, can you confirm that you are unmuted? Could you say something, please? Ms. Drew is unmuted.
Allison, Mrs. Drew is also muted. Can you unmute her, please? And Deanna may be muted.
They just granted me rights to unmute myself. I assume you all can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Ms. Drew, could you say something to everyone, please?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted as well.
All right, thank you. All right. Let us proceed. At this time, we will go to audience items. Our first speaker this evening is Ms. Prince. Ms. Prince, you have 3 minutes. Our board secretary, Dave Rosenthal, will give you a notification at 30 seconds until you have to complete. Okay?
Thank you. Because you cannot respond, we're not able to discuss that my kid's first-term teacher incorrectly informed us that all teachers would have conferences in late October, so the last-minute September conferences were an unnecessary option. We cannot discuss that you have teachers in the district who won't go over tests, won't give a student the correct answer, even if asked 10 times in different ways, and are unwilling to correct grading errors that leave children with scores as low as 75, while the district pretends that retaliation isn't condoned. Let's not discuss that when an elite school for the first time in its 60-year history reopens its intake for a limited time to rescue talented students, and one of those students couldn't flee because the official records were provided at 35 days after request. Let's not discuss that this district allows individuals to harm students for whatever reason and would rather cover than create an environment where bad actors could not thrive. Instead, let's focus on the last time I addressed this school board, last month, when I noted lack of communication, withholding of information, and the glaring tendency for this school district to say one thing but do another. During the September 2nd board meeting, multiple trustees implored parents to use Let's Talk for communicating with district personnel because it was supposedly best, efficient, and monitored. However, in an October 13th district posting, the superintendent states, and I quote, "As a parent, you might notice that the teachers are taking longer than usual to respond to your call or email. This is because I have asked staff to keep their focus on planning, preparing, and delivering instruction and assessing student performance," end quote. This quote extols the fact that FBISD is not readily responding to calls, Let's Talks, or email concerns under the directive of the superintendent. Yes, the team of 8 implored parents and stakeholders to communicate instead of bothering them, and then Fort Bend ISD implored the employees to not respond as if staff are not capable of walking and chewing gum at the same time like in other districts or businesses. It's mind-boggling. This is one example among many, but it illustrates the need for integrity when dealing with stakeholders. But more importantly, it underscores the tenuous value the district places on parental engagement, communication, transparency, and matching words with actions. 90% of my Let's Talk emails or calls do not receive an answer, neither timely nor responsive. As a parent, my questions and issues are ignored in Fort Bend ISD, but I suspect that I am not alone. If you are a parent within Fort Bend ISD who is ignored, who noticed that things are going awry at your school, who sought help from the school or district to no avail, or who wants to advocate for your child and others, then please email changemakers2020-fortbend@yahoo.com. That's changemakers2020, all one word, -fortbend, all one word, @yahoo.com. Let's connect and unite for change.
Thank you, Ms. Prince. Our next speaker is Mr. David Lyman. Mr. Lyman, you will also get 3 minutes, and Mr. Rosenthal will give you your 30-minute notice.
Thank you. I passed the temperature check but failed the antihistamine drug test, so forgive me for my allergies. That was a joke. Hi, I'm Dave Lindeman, parent of 2 kids in Fort Bend, and I'm part of a large Facebook group that focuses on getting kids back to school face-to-face. And I'd like to distill out of the thousands of comments and hundreds of posts, 2 things: 1 piece of feedback and 1 major request for change. So the feedback first, and that is that based on everything we've seen and experienced, the current dual mode of face-to-face and online learning is not working. It's failing. And truthfully, if parents have to sit through another meeting where we all congratulate ourselves on a job well done, we're going to lose our minds, because that's not what's happening on the ground for either the teachers or the parents or the kids. Now, that being said, of course, we all recognize y'all and everyone in the admin has spent, untold numbers of hours trying to come up with a plan, and we really appreciate that. But it's not too late to change the plan. And so based on everything we've seen, 1 major change could really have a huge impact, and that is, of course, align the schedules between face-to-face and online learning, and do it for the next semester. Now, we heard in the last board meeting why this is difficult. There's a lot of objections. So it's going to take 2 things, at least, to support this that are going to be difficult. Number 1, we need to remove the exemption for teachers to not come to school because they're afraid of COVID. They don't want to come face-to-face. Now, we realize this is difficult, but when you've got the whole rest of the school essentially locked down with safety protocols, does it really make sense for me to stay home and go, I don't want to go to school, when half of school now is trying to make me safe? It's just not fair. And we know, in fact, that a very few number of these teachers are abusing this. But it's not fair to everybody else. And guess what? The same goes true for the parents. We can't support parents who want the best of both worlds. They want to go to online school, and then we want face-to-face for the fun stuff, for extracurricular activities. If you want virtual football, play a video game, right? So it's not fair to support both models. A lot of the scheduling challenges revolve around that. So, I guess in summary, while we see COVID numbers pretty much improving across the board, and I think we're a few weeks into a semester now, and I don't believe there's a widespread outbreak like we were thinking about.
30
We don't want
seconds.
to be stuck in policy decisions from March of 2020. So maybe it's just time for us to realize that how awesome everybody is. We don't have the resources and the money and the time to support two models effectively. So making this single change, although complex, I think could have a huge impact. And thanks everybody for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir, for coming tonight. All right, next up are our information items. 6A, Student Achievement Update.
Yes, ma'am. I believe our Deputy Superintendent, Deanna Saavedra, is going to begin this discussion with us this evening.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Vice President Helliger, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Dupree. Tonight, the administration will be presenting an update on the efforts to support student achievement during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our presenters this evening will be Ms. Melissa Hubbard, our Executive Director of Teaching and Learning, Pavana Menza, our Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Schools, and Pilar Westbrook, our Executive Director of Social Emotional Learning and Comprehensive Health. Last week, can you change the slide for me, please, Gary? Thank you. Last week, I think a number of us attended the State of the Schools panel discussion that was sponsored by the Fort Bend Chamber of Commerce. And as I listened to the opening remarks, there was something that struck me that Mr. Rice opened the meeting with that I think is important to note. He stated that public schools are our best hope for the future. And I believe that that is true. For decades, our nation, our state, and our local community have come to expect public schools and our educational system to prepare present and future generations with knowledge and problem-solving skills to thrive. Prior to COVID-19, the entire educational system was based on a face-to-face model, but that system no longer exists. Instead, in the throes of the pandemic, we find that the COVID is overwhelming the function and outcomes of our system as a whole, and it's completely disrupted what we know to be true in education. It's true for all communities, again, across the nation, in our own community, across the state, and it affects all children at differing levels. So what we've done is we've gone through and asked the question, what does the research say in terms of how we should best navigate this pandemic? In a review of the research, we looked at the Annenberg Institute of Research for Brown University. We've looked at a number of academic journals, including journals coming out of Harvard University and the University of Washington. And there are 4 key strategies and insights that the research tells us in terms of how districts should prepare to adjust and rebuild their systems to appropriately address what we're dealing with in terms of the COVID pandemic. The first thing that they talk about is adopting a long-term strategy for addressing student gaps. They also advise districts to prioritize high-quality instructional practices that transcend learning models. In other words, regardless of what the learning model is, it's important for us to hold true to what we know in terms of the delivery of instruction and how students learn. They also recommend to really look at your data systems and possibly adjust your data systems to account for real-time formative data to inform the work and to monitor the progress of the system and of students. And finally, they talk about the importance of principals and the support that they receive, that it be focused on instructional leadership and really working with principals on how they can inform and improve instruction in classrooms across their campuses. Next slide, please. In short, it's not enough for the system to simply address the delivery of services. We also have to be held accountable for the quality of the services that we deliver. So, as we've all experienced, there's no silver bullet in terms of how we adequately respond and address all the needs that we're faced with as we navigate the pandemic. There's no one right solution. Districts across the country, across the state, in our own communities have employed a variety of strategies to respond to the pandemic. They've adapted and built their systems in various different ways, and they've come across varying degrees of success along with a number of challenges. In Fort Bend, we're not going to say that we have all the answers because we don't. We've made a number of mistakes along the way, and when we make mistakes, we're honest and transparent about the mistakes that we make. But what we do know in Fort Bend is that we have a very strong directional system to draw from in terms of our decision making and working through those things that will align to our mission, our vision, our core beliefs and commitments. And what we have committed to is delivering a high quality learning experience to every student in Fort Bend ISD. I say that, but that's no easy task. And so what we will be sharing with you this evening is some information about 3 key system strategies associated with academics, performance, and support in terms of how we're positioned in Fort Bend to continue to meet the challenge. I want to start with academics and the implications of curriculum design. Again, as we look at the research that's out there, the information states that there are many districts that will be tempted to front load curriculum and deal with learning gaps at the onset. And what we've chosen to do instead in Fort Bend ISD and with the research and what's supported by research is that in order for us to truly address any gaps that may present themselves as our students work through learning, it needs to be done in real time when the content is relevant. So we've looked at curriculum design and conducted a gap analysis of the standards so that we can truly address student learning gaps and intervene with students in real time. We've also addressed instructional expectations. We've communicated those to teachers, what that looks like in both the online environment and in the face-to-face environment, and we've held true to the learning framework that we've established. And that includes rigorous content delivery, the use of student ownership tools, the use of formative assessment, and consistent feedback to students on their learning and their progress. When we think about the performance of the system and what we have in place in order to appropriately monitor how well we're doing, or if there is a need for improvement, we've got some rigorous and robust progress monitoring tools, specifically the Leading Improvement Communities Framework, and looking at how we best monitor instruction so that we can continue to support principals and we can continue to support teachers. Our Department of School Leadership is leading that effort, and they are committed to supporting principals in that way. Again, an alignment to what the research tells us is best practice. When we think about data analysis and the things that we'll use to determine what student achievement might look like and how to progress monitor children, we go back to our assessment framework. But I do want to be clear about our assessment framework when we think about the fact that it includes diagnostic assessment, common formative assessment, and classroom assessment. Our diagnostic assessment, which we typically, which is our REN 360, is going to be important at the classroom level, but at this point, it's going to be difficult for us to draw from that data to determine organizational health in terms of student achievement in reading and numeracy. Again, we're gonna have to rely heavily on how that data plays out in the classroom, and it is very useful for classroom teachers in diagnosing students and intervening, as I said, real time and working through the development of numeracy and reading for our students. When we think about common formative assessment at the organizational level, our assessment framework calls for district learning assessments. For this school year, district learning assessments in all probability will not be possible for us to use at an organizational level. Ms. Hubbard will share some information about what data we will be analyzing and how we'll triangulate that data so that it's informative to us at the district level as best as it can be, but more importantly, how teachers can use it to truly address student learning gaps and enrich their learning experience. Lastly, when we think about support, it's important for us to think about what system signals can we look at and can we analyze to determine when there is a need for support. And so we'll be looking at attendance, we'll be looking at grade distributions, we'll be looking at walkthrough data, all at the organizational level to determine what can we glean, what signals is that sending us in terms of us deploying the necessary support to the campus, for a principal to deploy support to a teacher, or for even a teacher to understand what that data is telling him or her about a student that may be in need of additional support. And finally, as we think about educating the whole child, we know that as we navigate this pandemic, the social and emotional supports of our students, for our students, is paramount. And so we'll spend some time sharing with you how we're also addressing those supports and what kind of data we might look at in the future so that, again, we can gauge how do our students feel, how are they managing, because we know that that relationship and their frame of mind in the learning environment is critical as they continue to learn. So at this time, I will hand the presentation over to Melissa Hubbard so she can share some more specific information, again, about our curriculum efforts and the data and the adjustment in the data that we're making to provide us insight on student achievement. Melissa?
Thank you, Deanna. And can y'all hear me okay? Okay. So as we move through our directional system, we always want to make sure that our mission and vision are at the forefront of what we're doing and that we are aligned to our district goals. So I'm going to be spending just a few moments emphasizing our instructional expectations as it relates to both the face-to-face and the online learning environments. So the curriculum audit was presented earlier in this summer when Gibson came and kind of talked us through what we have in the curriculum, and they did provide some insight into the quality of the curriculum that exists and the components that are there for our teachers to use to plan instruction. And so as we moved into planning for this school year, we made sure to create a learning framework based on those board goals and development of student ownership regardless of the learning environment. So our learning framework is based on the things that we should see in the classroom environment regardless of face-to-face or online, and what those expectations should look like. So in a face-to-face learning environment, we still expect our instruction to be aligned to TEKS and our instructional models, and for it to be rigorous for all students. But in the online learning environment, we still have that high expectation, but we're going to be using Teams to deliver that synchronous learning. So it's not about the what, but about the how and the different tools that would be used in that online environment. When it comes to progress monitoring and assessment, we expect our teachers to be using authentic student work to identify the student's strengths and the areas of focus, just as Deanna had mentioned with formative assessment practices. But in the online environment, we're going to use technology tools in order to capture those. And so we're still looking for that authentic student evidence, but we're going to use technology tools to gather that. In terms of feedback, we expect in the face-to-face learning environment that students have access to student ownership tools like rubrics and checklists and progressions in order to support self, peer, and teacher feedback. We also expect that in the online learning environment, that those rubrics and checklists, they might be embedded in Schoology, and students might be using collaborative tech tools in order to provide feedback virtually. And in both learning environments, we expect that that feedback is ongoing and that students and parents know that student progress using tools like the Schoology Gradebook, Skyward, and other parent communication tools to make sure that everybody's aware of that student progress as students are learning the curriculum. So in terms of curriculum design, as Ms. Saavedra had noted earlier and based on the research, is we went into the curriculum design with the philosophy that we wanted the learning gaps to be connected to new learning that's happening this year, as opposed to front-loading all the standards at the beginning of the year and then trying to recoup throughout the school year. We wanted there to be meaningful connection with spiraling of content. So the Teaching and Learning Division engaged in a gap analysis for every grade level and every content area from term 4 of the 2019-20 school year, and indicated the standards that maybe didn't have as much of an emphasis when we engaged in online learning in term 4. What you see on the screen here is an example of third grade science. And so we looked at all of the standards from term 4 and we determined, is that standard a foundational standard? And if the student really struggled and didn't get access to that content, they would then struggle in subsequent grade levels. Was it a capstone standard or skill, meaning that was the last year the kids would see it, they wouldn't have exposure to it later on? And we kind of categorized these standards and determined, looking vertically, where does it fit in the next grade level? And so I'll just use an example from here, 3.10a, structures and functions of organisms. In third grade, the students may have not had access to that content because of term 4 online learning, but we know that students are going to need some support with that when they get to 4th grade in Unit 6. And so we've strategically placed specific curriculum supports into the curriculum based on this gap analysis. We wanted to look at this from a vertical perspective and make connections in units of instruction where it was relevant for students. So there were 4 categories in which our curriculum supports existed. One of them may have been a scope and sequence adjustment, where we may have had to add a couple of days to a unit of instruction to make up for that lost instruction from term 4. We also built in specific supports into the instructional delivery portion of the curriculum to highlight where a teaching consideration that they might have when introducing or addressing these topics. And then we gave teachers some specific teaching considerations, some things to think about when planning a unit of instruction that might address some learning gaps that students may come in to a specific unit of instruction with based on term 4 online learning last year. We've also indicated if the curriculum support needed to be a pre-assessment. mentioned earlier the importance of formative assessment, we identified specific peaks in which a pre-assessment skill might be needed to pre-assess that skill in the classroom, gather classroom formative data, and then make a decision about whether or not the teacher needed to reteach the entire content, or did just a small group of students need a reteach on that specific topic. What you'll also notice here is that sometimes the learning gap is not just the next year. One of the examples on the screen is actually, we will see evidence of this when our kids are in 5th grade, so 2 years out. And in some instances with some courses, even 3 years out. And so we've indicated that on our gap analysis so that we can plan forward for longer term supports for students and not just short-term front loading. So in terms of the gap analysis, that was conducted so that we could provide all students access to the content. So now we're going to discuss evidence of student progress related to the availability of evidence and data that we do have. So as Ms. Ivader had mentioned earlier, we have specific components within our assessment framework, and that's our district diagnostic assessment, which is Renaissance 360, which we have completed our beginning of year assessment. I'm going to go over some data in just a moment. We have classroom formative, which can be grades, campus walkthrough data as campuses are engaging in that, student engagement data in the online environment, and then the last component being our state accountability system, which is STAR. We did not provide the STAR assessment at the end of last year, and so we know we don't have that specific data point to be able to utilize. So we do have our district diagnostic, which we're going to be looking at here in just a moment for some trends and patterns that we've noticed at the district level. But the power for this year is going to be in our classroom formative assessments. That's the assessments that are closest to the work of teachers and students learning. And so for this year, we will have to, we will be relying heavily on that information in terms of student progress. So Renaissance 360, as I stated before, we have completed the beginning of the year assessment, and we did notice some trends and patterns from our BOY assessment. What you'll see on this screen is the average scaled score of students who took the assessment. And this is specific to elementary. And what you're probably noticing in grades kinder, first, second, and even third grade is a steeper slope or a steeper line as we get to the fall of 2020. And that's indicating that we had a pretty significant jump in the average scale score of those grade levels. We can assume that this higher jump in average scale score at the district level is a result of some assistance maybe with taking the test because the kids are more dependent in order to be able to move through the assessment. In 4th and 5th grade, you'll see that it starts to level out and that we have a pretty even trend in the average scale score. We also know as kids get to 4th and 5th grade, they are a little bit more independent. And so what this has helped us to realize at the district level is that we need to provide supports for utilizing Renaissance 360 data to triangulate and look at other data points as well to determine the supports that students might need. We have developed, we have a student support team at each campus, and we've provided guidance on how do we triangulate data for our students if individual students need to look a little bit deeper. Again, this is average scale score, but teachers have individual reports for every student in their classroom. So they would be able to look at student scale score as well as intervention categories to determine if what the needs are of each individual kid, or if they need to triangulate other data points to determine student needs with this particular assessment. In terms of secondary, what you'll notice here is that we have some curves and some pretty steep lines in 11th and 12th grade, and that's mainly a result of the fact that our testing group in secondary, the required testing group, has changed year over year. What we've noticed is as we have started to implement REN, we've had more kids testing than is what is required. We previously to this year only required secondary students that did not pass STAR or an EOC exam to take Renaissance. This year we have asked that all 6th through 10th graders take the assessment so that we can get initial data points. And we've even seen an increase in 11th and 12th graders taking the assessment so that we can get this data point on our secondary students. So at this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Mensah, who is going to explain the importance of monitoring our instruction for our students and teachers.
Yeah, so we've been extremely fortunate to have a remarkable group of principals and assistant principals who led the way in ensuring that we have a safe environment for our students and staff to return. They also spent countless hours hand scheduling thousands of schedules for students to ensure that students would come back to school in the appropriate setting, whether it's face-to-face or online. And throughout all of those processes and ensuring that we have a safe environment for our students.
Excuse me one second.
And working, setting up the dual schedules.
Excuse me one
our
second.
leaders were still focusing on monitoring instruction.
Excuse me one second. I'm having a hard time hearing. I don't know if the person is too close to the computer or whatnot, but it sounds muffled to me. Can you take a step back from the computer so that we can, or turn the volume down a little bit on your microphone, please? I'm sorry.
Okay, let me adjust it. Are you able to hear me differently now? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Does it sound better?
To me, it sounds a little better. There's a lot of echoing and just sound muffled. So, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. I can see Ms. Ayavedra. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. So just to recap, I was just speaking about how well our principals and assistant principals have led us to this point as they focus on ensuring that we had a safe learning environment and ensuring that we had all the health and safety protocols, as well as focusing on all the hand scheduling, thousands of schedules that we had to work on to ensure that students were in the appropriate learning environment. Through all of that, the leaders were still focused on monitoring effective instruction, because we know that primary focus for our leaders is to ensure that we have the appropriate instruction for our students in each classroom. So utilizing the Leading Improvement Communities Framework, which you'll see over here on the screen, leaders focused on having very clear expectations and communicating that to teachers. When they communicate those clear expectations, then they inspect those expectations. And then they go into the feedback conversation. So if we utilize this as an example, right now we had some new learning experiences for our teachers. Some of our teachers are teaching online the first time. We also have teachers who are teaching cross-entity, which means that they've been teaching students from different schools. So there's a lot of different instructional arrangements. So we recognize that it's important to really start from a foundational level of expectations, just talking about some clarity. Just what does it look like? What are expectations for it in an online teaching environment? So that we can have some clarity for teachers so they know what the expectations are for that. Then as a campus leader, the focus would be to go into that online learning environment and observe so they can see if the things that they have clearly articulated are present. Using those effective observational skills, then they would have robust conversations with teachers to give them feedback. It's a collaborative conversation to try to identify where are high leverage areas in which they can improve. That whole cycle is a cycle that we utilize for principals working with teachers, as well as Department of School Leadership is going through the process of being coached and how we can support principals through this process as well. So our coaching process follows the same cycle. It's the same kind of cycle that you would expect for teachers to use with their students. They would have clear expectations for what they're expected to learn. They would look at student products to see if those students are really meeting those expectations. And then they would provide feedback to those students so that the students can make adjustments. Next slide, Gary. Now, we know how important it is for us to utilize signals so that we can make adjustments and not wait until the end. So we want to make sure that we have some information and some data points that allow us to respond quickly. So you'll see highlighted in the light blue some of the key areas which we feel like are very important for us as a district to monitor as metrics. It's important for us to know how many of our students are actually showing up. So to what degree are our students showing up to school? We're looking at the grade distribution. So to what degree are our students performing on all of their different assessments inside class, and what are the grades telling us about the performance of students inside their classes? When we look at mental health, to what degree are we providing the supports to our students as they return to school face-to-face and as they are working in the online environment? And then lastly, our instructional walkthrough, that's going to give us a picture of to what degree are we providing the learning experiences that we are committed to for all of our students. So when we're looking at this data, we're looking at this data from the district level, we're also analyzing it from campus down to classroom. We're looking at it also from a learning model perspective, from online versus face-to-face. And a lot of this data is data that we're collecting right now, and we're just aggregating this data, and then we should be able to provide some of this data in our next meeting in November. So now we're going to pass it over to Dr. Westbrooks, who's going to speak a little bit more about our social emotional support.
Thank you, Dr. Mensa. So in looking at mental health and social emotional support, we realize that building compassionate relationships is our new normal. We provided district-wide professional development at the start of the school year. We made sure to emphasize face-to-face versions of the professional development as well as for online aspects that teachers would definitely experience. We wanted to make sure that we were supporting relationship building with compassion at the forefront. In order to support the whole child, whether socially, emotionally, mentally, behaviorally, or physically, there would be needs for intervening assistance. So we ended up with these reinforcements being able to be supported by either a school counselor, a mental health counselor, a social worker, behavior facilitator, or other wraparound services. Along with that professional development that we did this summer, that professional development included social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, relationship building, as well as positive expectations for that online or in-person environment. And we know that our counselors are our tier 1 for mental health support, but we want to acknowledge the fact that they have been inundated with scheduling, doing the building of the schedules for students, actual practice in the classroom, what classes they would take. And we know this has a negative impact on the mental health support that could be provided by our counselors. and we need to acknowledge that. We also want to acknowledge that this could continue as we do the mid-semester adjustment for scheduling. So we are, and we know we need to rely on our teachers heavily to provide the mental health support by relationship building and having that compassionate environment of belonging where they facilitate every day that compassionate environment in their classroom. Teachers are a huge asset, and they're on the front lines to provide that care and compassion in the building, building those relationships of support, supporting the grief and loss where things are different than their normal way of doing things. School is different, things feel different, so that normalcy can definitely impact students as well as families and the teachers. And we're trying to continue that moving forward. Additionally, we'll be looking at data from our mental health counselors. As we have been, we know that it maybe hasn't been used as much since we've gone virtual, but we continue to provide the access to the resources online, and we'll continue to provide the support and access those resources as much as possible and as often as possible so that students, parents, staff, community members can get the support needed for their kids. And that is it for me.
Gary, thank you. So as we kind of round out the presentation, I do want to provide information on signals, system signals that we are preparing to share with the board in November. So first of all, we continue to work to pull attendance data. We will be providing attendance data in November that's disaggregated and shows the frequency of students coming to school, and again, where do the signals point that we need to deploy additional supports and resources for students who may be challenged with attendance. Because we know primarily this as a signal is critical, because if students are not engaging in learning either through the online platform or attending school, then they're missing out. So attendance information used as a system signal at the district level, at the campus level, at the classroom level, and then student by student is going to be important for us to look at on a monthly basis, and we'll be reporting where we are with attendance in November. Specifically disaggregating the grade distribution data, again, attendance is important, and it's important for us to look at how are kids doing in terms of grades. We know in talking to many of our neighboring districts, we do anticipate that as we disaggregate the data, we're going to see much higher failure rates than we have in the past for the first grading period. Typically, in any given school year, our term 1 grading period, our first 9 weeks, is typically where our students do the best in school, and then they fluctuate from that point forward. But as I said, we anticipate that the grade distribution is going to be much lower than what we have seen in the past. Again, mental health services, it's going to be important for us to monitor what services are students accessing, what is the delivery of services, at what level, is there a greater need for Tier 1, where are we with Tier 2 deployment, and what kind of crisis responses are we having to entertain from campus to campus, feeder pattern, and then at the organizational level. So in November, when we come back to you, we'll have much more specific information about what it looks like by then. We should see our system should be much more settled in terms of schedules, and we will have developed a rhythm in terms of the day-to-day operations of school. I also want to let you know that we'll continue to work through the using REN 360 data. We'll administer our middle of the year and our end of the year assessments, but in addition to that, we'll be working with teachers and campuses to use this tool for regular progress monitoring, or more frequent progress monitoring, if you will, with individual students should they need that. And as Melissa indicated, we'll make adjustments to our system so that the quality of our data is much better as we go forward. And then, as Dr. Menza indicated, we'll be launching more formal instructional walkthroughs focused on instruction beginning in January. We're doing those now, but as I said, and I alluded to in my opening remarks, our educational system has been quite disrupted. And so, and I know that Dr. Dupree has communicated this on a number of occasions, that as we think about where our teachers are functioning and the continued adjustments that students need to make in terms of their schedules, we're all working at the lowest levels of Maslow's hierarchy, right? So when we think about instructional walkthroughs, we're thinking about in the early stages leading up to January, we're thinking about if you've got a distance learning section, we're going to be looking at is the distance learning setting set up for you to be the most successful? What challenges are being presented in that learning environment? What supports might you need? If you're a cross-entity teacher, we're going to be again looking at your instructional setting. We're going to be interacting with teachers to find out what are the challenges that you're facing if you're dealing with a cross-entity classroom. So again, we can deploy support and we can determine what we need to do to support our teachers and continue to improve the instructional delivery regardless of what learning mode our students are in. Last slide. So I want to close this evening by sharing some thoughts associated with resilience. And you'll see a quote that I came across as I was preparing for this evening. And it reads, "Resilience is the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstance." That is what we are attempting to do in Fort Bend ISD. We are a resilient system, and we will continue to work hard to provide the highest level of instruction for our students. I'm getting a little emotional because in just a few minutes, we're going to share a video with you, because as we've been walking classrooms and we've been observing students return into the face-to-face environment, we've found that our system is resilient, that we see in the halls of our campuses students and staff who are excited, who are smiling, and who are hopeful. And so I'd like to publicly thank the Nicastro family for allowing us to share an amazing video of their son, Nicolas. He's a 5th grader from Colony Meadows Elementary, and he truly exemplifies the resilience, the hope, and the excitement and energy in our schools across Fort Bend ISD. Gary, can you click to launch the video, please? As luck would have it, a technology glitch. Well, as Gary is working to launch the video, I'm sorry that we're not able to show it, but as he's working on trying to share the video, we'll take any questions, and if he's able to get it working at the close of questions, we'll share it at that time.
Thank you, Dr. Saavedra. At this time, I have questions from our board members. Ms. Tausan, first, please.
Thank you, Ms. Helliger. I appreciate that. And thanks, Dr. Saavedra, to you and your team for the presentation this evening. So my questions are going to be centered around mental health and then the gaps that I'm concerned about, just as you guys are, as we move forward into the spring semester. So I'm going to start with the mental health aspect. You mentioned that counselors have been inundated with scheduling, and so they've not been able to support our students as usual. So a lot of the burden has fallen to our teachers, as has much of the burden as we've run the dual learning model. So my questions are, number one, what are we doing about the mental health of our teachers and our counselors and our staff? And number two, how are we going to do better in the spring? And this is part of what I asked last week at the board meeting, because you talked about teacher relationship building with students, but the problem that we've had is a disconnect as schedules have been upheaved and students don't have their same teachers, and we've had teacher changes, at least for some of our students. So how are we going to prevent that in the spring? And then what are we doing for our teachers and our staff in the mental health aspect?
Well, what I was, I'm gonna start, Ms. Tausan, by sharing the fact that we understand that the workload on our teachers has been big. They're carrying a heavy load, and the last few weeks especially has been exceptionally trying for them. And so, you know, from a broad brush, we continue to work to communicate with them so that they can anticipate what is coming ahead. In addition to that, we are looking at all of the, you know, we talked about teacher expectations. We're looking at things that we would normally employ, things that we would normally use, and we're developing a list that we hope to announce to teachers this week of things that we can remove and pull off of their plates so that we can provide them a level of relief. I know that our principals work with their staffs on a day-to-day basis, and I know as our principals lead their staff, they're working with them with care and compassion, and again, they're working to alleviate the load as much as they can. I realize that their health, especially in this last few weeks, again, has been very trying. So we'll continue to find ways to reduce the amount of stress, to provide them with the supports that they need so that they can do the job that they do well, which is deliver instruction. I know that we also have wellness supports through our health and benefits system, and something that we've employed as a district and organizationally, and we've modeled this for our campus administrators, and I know that they use these strategies as they work with their teachers. We have wellness moments that we use to open every meeting. And we employ breathing exercises. We communicate the importance of self-wellness and finding the balance between work and home. And our Live Well app constantly sends reminders and updates to our employees about ways that they can relieve stress and take care of their wellness. Gwen Touche may be able to offer some additional information about the wellness app and those services that our staff can access. Gwen?
Well, I'm gonna interrupt. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the response, and I think that I'm glad to hear that we're gonna be getting some things off of their plate. I think that that's gonna go a long way towards helping them. When you said breathing, not to discount breathing, but it reminds me of what they told me when I was in labor. Just breathe through it, and that doesn't always cut it. So I appreciate that, but I think getting the things off of their plate, I'm glad to hear you say that. I feel like that's going to help relieve a lot of that burden, and I'm going to continue to push us to find a way for our spring semester, and when the kids come back in January, which I assume we'll have more kids coming back in January, that we'll not have the schedule upheaval, because I heard you say that systems should be settled in terms of schedules, but that's really only until January, as we have to start looking at all of this again. So I'm going to reiterate that concern. I know you guys are working on it, and I know you're working hard to not have this again. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Ms. Tassan, could I interject a couple of thoughts?
Go ahead.
No, just because you made some good points, and I appreciate what Deanna said, but I want to point out too, I mean, I'm going to be real practical here. Right now, we're doing everything we can to protect the 3-day weekend that's coming up on the 30th, 31st, and 1st.
Yeah.
We're going to kind of do a little no work weekend campaign around that everybody desperately needs. We're desperately trying to protect Thanksgiving week and the winter break. I mean, we were in a 2-hour meeting this morning plan for the transition so that we can get parent selection for anyone who wants to change, the scheduling done, and get everybody off the calendar going into winter break and all of Thanksgiving break if possible. So we're being very purposeful. I mean, I think the reality is, and I know you all are tired of me saying this, but we've gone from 100% virtual to a 60-40 split, which was a huge lift. Anything beyond this is going to be incremental. It may tilt more 50-50, maybe even 55-45 or whatever the other way. We don't know what it's going to look like for the spring, but I've been talking to several principals just directly even, and their belief is as long as we don't overhaul the whole system, that we can do incremental shifts during the time we have. But it's still going to be work, because it's still going to be hand scheduling and a lot of detail effort. But we're taking that very seriously to support the people on the ground, and especially with what you mentioned about the significance of the relationship and not upheaving students' schedules. And that's hard for teachers as well. So, but I will tell you that you've read my emails. I mean, and some staff they'll push back and say, well, yeah, you keep saying take care of yourself, and they're tired of hearing that. But I keep saying it because so much of it is in the personal mindset, and that's the resilience. I'm just going to be candid. You know, I love the quote Deanna ended this with, but this is testing. It is challenging the resilience of our organization.
Yeah.
It's making me wonder, are we really as resilient as we think we are to do this? I mean, but I see it in the classrooms. I see our teachers. I see our counselors. Our AP's working hard, but I'm telling you, it is near breaking. But I want to say last week it was near breaking, the week before, but I'm consistently seeing pressure being relieved as well. As I talk to teachers, as I talk to principals, as I go to campuses, I see it was worse. It's getting better. It's getting better. And someone reminded me even today, we're just in the 2nd week of school. So things will settle. We believe in that, but it's finding that we need to get in a rhythm that we can sustain even as we get into January. And that's what we're shooting for. That's going to be the best thing I think we can do for the well-being of staff.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that response, and that is more practical, and I do think that we need to protect those days off, and I'm glad to hear that we're talking about not the heavy lift in January. I hope we'll continue to push to find solutions, including possibly aligning the bell schedule. I know I sound like a broken record on that, but I'm interested in seeing as we move forward if that's something, if this is something we need to continue with, or if you guys are maybe reconsidering that, or if it wouldn't maybe help relieve some of that pressure as we go back to spring. So thanks for that. The other kind of focus I wanted to have was on the gaps, and I was glad to hear you. I mean, I'm concerned about the data that we're getting. I think what you guys showed us is that we have reason to be concerned about the data, and so I don't know what questions I can ask that you'll be able to answer specifically right now, because I know that we have even gaps in the data, and we're still waiting to get some of that. But I'm very concerned that, the more, I guess I go back to relieving those schedule changes, because the more we spend changing schedules and doing that, the less learning is taking place, as we all know. So I think we really have to focus on not having any more asynchronous days or having any more gaps in that learning time. To that end, I want to make you guys aware of, or at least maybe have some questions. Even if you can't answer them tonight, I'd like to get some answers in the near future. I know that as kids get sick and they're having to quarantine, they're not able to access online classes or online learning. They're being quarantined and maybe sent work home, particularly our elementary school kids, but with schedules not aligned at the high school level either, they're not able to access those classes. And so I fear that that's going to create even more gaps for those kids. So I guess my question is what are we doing about that? Can we maybe do that better? Do we have a better solution for that, for the kids that have to quarantine at home?
Well, I'd like to address that, and again, I may not be able to address specifically, but I know that in our comprehensive plan, we have an entire chart that really outlines if this happens in a particular classroom, then this is our response. If we're dealing with a particular situation associated with students being quarantined, this is what we need to do. If a teacher is impacted, this is what we need to do. So I appreciate you bringing that to light. We do need to go back, and we need to make sure that we are following the protocol that's outlined in our comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and
because our goal is, as we shared last week, is business continuity. And part of that business continuity is to maintain the system of learning for students, whether they're at home or whether they're in the face-to-face environment.
Yeah, so that's what I'm bringing. So that's not really happening, and I know a lot of our kids, or at least some of our kids, I know personally of a few this week that were not exposed to COVID, but that had a runny nose or something like that, and they're being sent home. So I'm just really concerned about those gaps. And I know, like you said, we're still in some upheaval, but I think we need some better solutions for those kids, because it's really, and parents who chose to go back face to face and now their kids home because it's allergy season or fall or whatever, then they're having to bear the brunt of trying to teach their child, because there's not even an online model for them right now. So I just, like I said, I know you don't have to answer it right now, but I think we need to look at those systems a little bit and see if we can't tighten those up and maybe improve them.
Can I interject something there? Because I do want you to know, and the board to know, just this morning I asked Joe Rodriguez, to go, now that we've got a couple weeks of history in this new model, I asked him to provide me specific follow-up on what is actually happening at the schools.
Okay.
Because what you've described, I want to be mindful that we don't overgeneralize, because my guess is what you've described is happening in some cases, and that's why I want him to demonstrate to me that our campuses are following the established protocols that Deanna set forth.
Okay.
Because we need to correct that. We have systems in place. Every student should have access to their teachers and online instruction. There is no reason anybody should be sending packets home to students who are home. So if that's happening, we need to know why and where, and Joe's going to get into that and affirm to me that we are properly executing when these kids go home for quarantine.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And, I know it's challenging for our teachers, so I'm not speaking to throw any teachers under the bus, but at the same time, I mean, those gaps are going to be real.
It's critical.
When they are missing all of that learning. Also, at a future time, I'd like to see, when we're looking at those, you talked about more kids failing, you know, as a result of this, of what we have going on now with our systems. I'd like to know how many more are failing now that we're passing pre-COVID. I'd like to see some of those numbers when y'all have them, break them out so that we can look at those percentages. And I'd also like to see them by grade level, to see if there's not some trends or patterns in those grade levels.
We
Yeah.
are going to provide that in November based on the first grading cycle. And I do want to interject because I know we've got a lot of people viewing at home, and Deanna alluded to this, but we cannot overstate that the issues we are dealing with are exactly the same issues going on nationally and in other districts. I've talked to many other superintendents. I mean, you can read about it in the newspaper. Students are struggling everywhere. Kids who have never failed are failing, and we're dedicated to getting to the root of it. But I just don't want our community, number one, I don't want our teachers to feel defeated, that they're doing something wrong or bad. And I don't want our community to have the perception that Fort Bend is failing somehow, because we're not. Every other district is dealing with this exact same situation right now.
Yeah, so I appreciate that information, and it doesn't surprise me. And I mean, I've talked to my own kids in my own house about learning and gaps and trying to keep up. So it's gonna be a real issue, and we're gonna have to address it. There's gonna be a lot of catch up. So the other thing I'd like to see an update on are the number of students that we had that are not enrolled right now in Fort Bend ISD, but aren't enrolled elsewhere. I'd like to see an update on those numbers and if we've been able to reach any more kids and get them back in school some way or another. And then the last thing I'll say is, when Dr. Rodriguez, when you're looking at our systems, I think we've had answers in this boardroom about why we had kids going face-to-face or online, and teachers not live streaming, not teaching the face-to-face at the same time that they're teaching online. And I know this is going on. So it could be because we still have scheduling, issues, and we're trying to find teachers, I know, to teach some of those classes. But I'd like to get an update on that, and if we are doing that and are allowing teachers to choose that, I'd like to know that, and maybe the basis for that. And if not, and it's happening, perhaps, why is that taking place? And are we supporting those kids and those teachers who are trying to juggle the face-to-face and the online at the same time? So I think that's it for now. I have a few other questions, but I'll take them offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson.
So, Dr. Dupree, I'm not sure if we want to continue with the questions, but I understand that the video is queued up.
Yes,
we may want to.
We'll close. We'll finish the questions and then go to the video.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Ms. James?
Thank you, everybody, and good to see everybody tonight. And thank you, Ms. Saavedra, and team for a great presentation. I particularly appreciated kind of having some calibration around our student achievement data and understanding. And I think what I understood was the high expectations, the high level of effort into the curriculum and the curriculum design, and the high expectations around students and teachers, but yet we're balancing that with an understanding of our circumstances and an understanding of this great transition that we're making in how we deliver education. And the great disruption, I guess, I think was your words, Mrs. Saavedra, about the COVID disruption and what that means. So I think that's a good balance. I guess what I'm not clear on is how we can achieve both things. How can we be saying we're applying the learning framework and we're focusing in on the rigor and you know, student ownership protocols and things like that, and then at the same time saying, all right, we're going to check when we do walkthroughs to see if we have the technology set up right, and we're going to check the folders to make sure they're set up right. And I can't quite align those. Can someone speak to that, please?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question, and I'll do my best to provide some clarification. And so when we think about where we are current day, some of the look-fors may be very classroom setup, routine, managerial in nature. But when our system settles within the next week or two, we'll begin to increase the expectation and really begin to provide more targeted feedback that's directly related to instruction. So I think that is gradually moving towards that. And again, as Ms. Tassan indicated, balancing that with the stress level that we know that our, you know, when we feel the pulse of the stress level beginning to reduce, we know that we can begin to, you know, press the envelope just a little bit in terms of raising the expectation about what we expect to see in the classroom. We're being very delicate with that balance right now, simply because we are still transitioning. But as Dr. Dupree said, when we develop that rhythm, we'll be able to provide more targeted feedback to our teachers. I also want to share that we're well positioned. If you think about the fact that some of our data systems that we've relied on are may no longer be there, or we may need to adjust those systems to really meet the need that we're dealing with right now. I want to just remind us that we've been working for the last year and a half with building an evidentiary plan associated with community-based accountability, so that we as an organization are looking at different ways that we can measure or determine, I shouldn't say measure, I should say determine progress, student achievement progress in terms of the health of our organization, and so forth. And so we'll continue to do that, and now more than ever, it's going to be critical for us to determine what evidence we'll accept, to determine, as Kwabena said, the degree to which the expectations that we set in each learning environment are being met, the degree to which we expect our students to be achieving at a given point during the school year in terms of their reading and their numeracy. And so some of the pre-work that we've done for community-based accountability is going to serve us well as we work to navigate the waters and this pandemic.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. That's a good clarification, and I guess what take away from it is we sort of have to ease into it a little bit, and we have high expectations, but we don't want to overwhelm staff or sink the boat before we've had a chance to progress a little bit. So there's not too much piling on going on, I guess, is the way to put it. I just to follow that thread for a minute, I appreciated some of the comments Mrs. Tassan made about teachers and their mental health, and I know that that is, I'm getting a lot of messages from teachers, anxious messages and feeling overwhelmed. And I know you guys are working on that, and you're addressing it, and that's what I heard in your answer. One of the things when Dr. Dupree was giving his practical answer, I thought to myself, are there changes in the calendar that might come up for consideration, or we might want to consider to help with this this scheduling piece? If we need to stack some days at the beginning of the semester where there's, I wouldn't be in favor of the more asynchronous learning days, but maybe some professional development days because I can see that aiding in the, potentially in the Schoology changes, but also giving teachers a chance to say, I'm off for the winter break, and when I come back, I'm going to have a couple of days to get my feet on the ground. So I'm just throwing that out there as an idea.
This is James. Let me, if you don't mind, I'll interject a thought there, because that is something, as we're developing our plans, we're going to be considering whether that's feasible for a couple of reasons. Because number one, we do believe our students have lost important instruction due to too many asynchronous learning days that were not used well. And so we're going to consider whether we need to recapture some of that time, but also we're going to consider what the spring should look like based on what we know now. And whether to include more breaks, different types of learning opportunities, but certainly we're giving consideration to whether we need to do something at the beginning of the year, or if we need to insert a couple of days later in January or February. But those are we appreciate your suggestions. As you've alluded to, and as this conversation has gone on, the balance we're trying to strike, and I think you've said it, Ms. Tassan said it, Deanna has said it, but I just want to reiterate, we're doing everything we can to keep our foot on the gas, to keep students learning. The temptation is to take everything off the table and just say teachers need to teach. And on a great, and that's when we get some of these heartbreaking emails about the stress, it's easy to say just take everything off, just let them do what they're going to do to get by. But that kind of goes back to what it looked like in April and May. And that was not successful. We need a clear direction, we need monitoring, we need accountability, but we also need to do that with empathy and understanding of the teacher's role. As you've read, my consistent messages to our teachers ask the teachers to give themselves grace, because a lot of the stress, when I talk to teachers and I get the greatest outcry from teachers, it's often teachers who've set a very high bar for themselves that they're unwilling to lower. And I'm trying to help our teachers understand, in a typical year, absolutely maintain that high bar. You're gonna get there, and the kids are gonna benefit. But under these circumstances, they've got to take some of the stress off of themselves by doing the basics that we ask them to do: the planning, the preparation, the delivery, the assessment. And we're gonna follow up with parents. They're gonna do their jobs, but they've got to understand this is not a typical season, and we do have to have accountability. But they've got to allow themselves to pull back just a little bit to be most successful in all aspects.
Okay, well, thank you for that, and I understand what you're saying, and I know there's a lot of. Some of it comes down to the environment. It comes down to the principal team and how they're supporting. It comes down to the grade level team and the subject matter team and how they're working together. And all those little things make a big difference. And I think another big factor, of course, is uncertainty. And when the staff members, so many of the secondary schedules are not set yet, and so they're just they're struggling with new kids leaving, linking courses, all those kinds of things, and it's some of those practicalities that streamline their work are missing, and it just feels overwhelming. So I appreciate you guys working through that, and I appreciate. So I appreciate also the system of signaling that you're talking about in terms of and bringing to the board what the attendance looks like and what the grade distributions look like. And I think all of that is going to be really helpful. I have a fairly high anxiety just from not knowing where our kids are and how big our lift really is. And I'm trying to grasp it, and I guess that's why I'll look forward to that information in November. One of the things that I would ask for in addition, and I'm not even sure what this would look like, but how do we how can we know how our emerging readers are doing, how our beginning readers are doing? Is there a way we can focus in on that a little bit through any of the signaling to help learn how our emerging readers are going?
So yes, we can look at even within the REN, we can look at some individual student scores related to their reading levels and their lexile levels and things of that nature. And as Ms. Sayavager said, we're looking at some other measures of implementing RENs so we can get a little bit more accurate data. We also have the teachers do their running records, so we have some information, the classroom level, related to those beginning readers and how they're progressing. There's also another report that we're looking at from REN that is fairly new related to reading levels, and they put them into two different categories. So we've looked at that from the beginning of the year, but I'd like to look at that again when we do middle of the year to see what it looks like in those two categories.
Okay, and is this something that you're thinking that you would share with the board so we would have an understanding of where our youngest readers are?
Yes, it is something we could share with the board. It's district level data. It's not student specific, but it'll give us some numbers to look at.
Well, I love numbers, so that's right up my alley. Okay, well, that would be great because I just feel like if we're waiting till, if we don't hear about them until February or something, then that really seems late. So I just thank you. I appreciate that. I'll look forward to that. And then the last thing I want to say is I asked, I think it was last week, about some data around, this is related to attendance. This is also related to something Mrs. Tossan said. I asked about students that are quarantining or sent home. She was asking more about sick days and kids that are sent home because they have a runny nose, and so that's on the symptom list, or they have a couple of symptoms on the symptom list, and how. So I think all of that sort of comes together because that definitely impacts attendance. And what it rings to me again is access to education. And if parents are all of a sudden relying on their kids being in a face-to-face environment, and we send them home, then I don't know, what are we doing to backfill that to make sure they still have the access that they need? And that's just a thought out there to throw in with, I guess, Dr. Rodriguez's analysis of attendance and quarantine protocols and such. So I guess that's not a question, that's a comment, and I think I have my questions answered. I thank everybody for their hard work. I thank you for the presentation tonight, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. James. Ms. Drew?
Hi, I just wanted to thank everybody for the presentation tonight. That I've asked at a couple of board meetings about gaps and how we were addressing them. And so it's definitely an area of concern for me as well. And so I do appreciate that you are looking into it and that we will have more data, disaggregated data in November, and you'll be able to give us a better picture in November. One thing, and maybe I missed it because we might have had some slight sound issues, but we talked about the last time sort of the rock, paper, scissors of our IT system, updating schedules and so on. And we talked about possibly being able to identify when we have reached a point where there wasn't, where we were at a better place, where schedules were at a better place. Are we there now? Are we 50% of the way? Where are we with issues that we're having with schedules and so on?
Joe, can you speak to that?
Yes, Ms. Drew, so we're still looking at gathering some of that information specifically, and it goes very well with what Dr. Dupree has requested for me as well. But is there something specific that you are wanting from administration?
Personally, I still see courses showing up as, on my twin schedule that they're not enrolled in. So I'm just trying to figure out, as a signal for parents, when would we expect that we wouldn't see these types of things?
So I'm gonna provide some information. I know that as we've looked at our schedules, obviously we've begun to transition our elementary students before our secondary students. So when we think about schedules from a broad perspective at the district level, our elementary schedules are in a good place right now. We've scrubbed those schedules. We've worked to really balance teacher loads and class loads and things in that area. Our middle school campuses, with the exception of our two largest middle schools, are in a good place. We are still working to balance classes and adjust high school schedules. Over the course of this week, we've been scrubbing the schedules, making sure that we have adequate staff, again, that we balance some of our online and face-to-face courses. And so we've built a timeline so that we can work through the class linking and so forth. I know that Dr. Dupree sent an update associated with that, and our hope is that we're going to move in phases with our elementary first, and then moving towards our middle school, and then the last phase would be our high school campuses. So by midweek next week, we're hoping that we will be able to finalize that last phase of the back-end technology work so that there's no more, fluctuation in what you see in Schoology.
Okay, so thank you for that. So what I get from that is that by next week we should start to see that schedules, a lot of that has been sorted out, and that we've worked through most of it thus far.
And at the middle school level, I would say at the middle school level, you would most likely see that before. The high school is really the greatest challenge at this point. But a vast majority of our campuses, their schedules have settled. We're at a point where we're no longer adding sections, and we're stabilizing the schedules so that we can, as you would say, lock them down and create the final phase of linking that needs to happen from the technology perspective.
Thank you for that. I think it's helpful, definitely for me as a parent, hopefully for the parents that are out there know when we would expect all of this to be locked down, to use your lingo. So yeah, and I just wanted to add a last comment that I'm really glad to hear that we're taking steps to reduce the stress level on teachers and staff. So just sort of kudos to you all for thinking about that. Because yes, we definitely do get a lot of feedback that this has been a heavy lift at times. So appreciate everyone's hard work. Thank you.
Well, and I want to add that, aside from that, Dr. Dupree is going to be launching listening tours with a number of stakeholders, counselors, our principals, and specifically our teachers. And they'll be able to give us some good information about what is overloading them, so that we can determine, as Dr. Dupree said, what do we need to keep pressing the gas on, and what are some of the things where we can let up just a little bit and provide them a level of relief.
That's good to hear. I think that'll be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drew. All right. I do have a last question. The REN 360 comparison data, and I'm just trying to think, did I miss this? But if you look at the data that says for fall 2020, majority of the graphs that you provided to us, the data increased. The numbers increased, the averages increased. Can you tell me what's the contributing factor to that?
Yes, ma'am. So the increase is related to the average scale score. So we took historical data over the last 4 years. What was the average scale score of the student when they took the test? And if you think about the scale score, you can relate that. It's not equivalent to STAR, but STAR also has a scale score. So the higher the scale score, the better the score for the student. So what you're seeing on those graphs is that this year, in a few of our grade levels, we had a pretty large spike up, showing that the kids are doing much better than they have traditionally over the last few years. And so when we looked at that trend, what we noticed is those were in the lower grade levels. And traditionally, as a parent, or yourself, the kids, when they're younger, they want more help. And so we can assume that maybe the parents provided a little bit more guidance to navigate through the test than the older kids got.
Yes, because I'm looking specifically at the high school. I didn't see a large spike difference in elementary, only in the English. But when you look at the data specifically for high school, you see a major spike in the numbers for fall 2020.
And Ms. Heller, are you specifically talking about 11th and 12th grade, the green and the purple ones, or the?
I mean, so for English, yes. I mean, it's the 11th and 12th grader. Then in
so traditionally in your
the math and English, you see a major difference as well for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders.
So traditionally in years past in high school, we didn't require all students to take Renaissance 360. We only required the students who did not pass STAR EOC to take Renaissance 360. And what we've seen over the last few years is campuses adding more students to the test who passed STAR and EOCs. So by the time that we got to this year, we had a lot more students involved in taking that test who had passed their STAR EOCs. So we're looking at different data sets of kids. So that's why we're seeing that drastic increase in the average scale score for those high school kids.
Okay, I mean, because there was, okay, I'm not sure.
So we're testing more kids.
The what?
We're testing more kids, and the profile of the student is very different. It's not the student who has not mastered the EOC over the course of several years. So when you test larger groups of students and the profile of the student that you're testing changes, you're going to see kind of an upward trend in the data.
So how do we then? Well, then I can't. Maybe I'm looking at it incorrectly, but if the profile of the student changes, so that means we have different types of students that are taking the test, correct? Then it's really not a good comparison to what we've been showing for fall 2017 to fall 19, because if you took the same profile and tested them between 2017 and 2019, my expectation that I would see a more of an average line across the board, like I did from fall 27 to fall 19. Are you understanding me? Follow me?
Yes, ma'am.
So to me, it's like your data set is different.
Yes. It is, and that was really, I mean, what we're trying to, the reason we showed that data is to demonstrate some of the concerns with it and why it's challenging to make decisions with it right now. So what you're tuning into is the same issues we're facing as leaders trying to gather data. We wanted to demonstrate to the board how challenging some of these usual tools are to use because we're having to identify new ways to use them and new tools as well.
Okay, all right.
So you're exactly understanding the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and although that it doesn't give us a good picture at the organizational district level, it's a good teacher classroom data that a teacher can use to diagnose where a student is and intervene and design instruction to meet their needs.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saavedra and the team for providing this information. All right, our next.
Watch the video.
Oh, we're gonna watch the video. The video's ready. That's right.
Tuesday, September 15th, 2020, and then be seated for a minute of silence. Thank you for. Good morning and welcome to KGRR Tiger News. Today is Tuesday, September 15th, 2020, and I'm Nico Portas Nicastro. Please stand for the pledges and then be seated for a minute of silence. Thank you for being silent, Tigers. Today is Tuesday, and we're talking about Schoology calendars. The calendar Schoology is a great way to keep up with asynchronous assignments. Remember that asynchronous assignments should be completed away from your teacher. Look at the right side of your screen and find the word upcoming. All assignments with during a course, you find recent activity or dashboard, all upcoming dates will appear. Using the Schoology calendar is one way to help make sure you don't miss assignments. What are some other ways you can stay caught up with assignments, Tigers? Brainstorm tonight with your mom and dad to make sure you're set for success. That's the news for now. Tune in tomorrow for all the news you can use. Thank you for watching KGRR Tiger News.
Very nice. All right, very nice. Thank you for sharing that. He looks like a little pro, so we need to watch out for him in the future. All right, our next information item is the board governance COVID-19 procurement update.
Brian?
Yes, good evening, Madam President and members of the board. As we've previously reported to the board, you all approved a resolution of emergency declaration back in March, and each month staff reports back to the board monthly expenditures made under that resolution. In September, $98,034.18 was made under the resolution. That includes expenditures for plexiglass, dividers, sneeze guards, disinfecting IT devices, and support for teleconferencing. Since the declaration was enacted, $639,067 in expenditures have been made under the resolution, and there is an action item on the agenda this evening that will rescind the authority for emergency procurement. And if there are any final purchases that have been made since the item is rescinded, we'll bring that report back to the board in November. And that concludes the report, and I'll be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you. We have a question by Mrs. James.
Yes, thank you for the report, Mr. Gwynn. I wanted to ask about the contact tracing contract, because it's not listed here. I think we brought it up at the last meeting, and you said it had been a September purchase, and I wondered if you could just tell us about a little bit about that and what the, I'm particularly interested in what the fixed costs are and how the length of the contract, and maybe if it's scalable or if we've committed to the whole thing, or what our situation is.
Okay, I'll start with the end question, or the last components of your questions in mind, and then work forward, and hopefully I don't miss anything, and please remind me if I do. So the contract that we have with IBM is about $4.7 million, and it expires as of June 31st, 2021, so at the end of this school year. It is a scalable contract, meaning that as our caseload increases, IBM will bring along the staff members that are necessary to complete that contract. In addition, we pay on a caseload basis. So as the number of employees that they have that are involved in contact tracing increase, then we would pay according to those additional workers. So to answer the question as to whether or not it's scalable, yes, ma'am, it is. That is part of the components of that contract. In addition to that, I think I mentioned the expiration of the contract. There was one other component in there that I think I'm missing that was at the beginning. It was the cost, the term, and the scalability. There was one more, I think.
One thing I was asking about was the fixed cost. So a good part of it, I think, is scalable, but how much are we committed to at this time, and what's fixed?
There's about $744,000 that was fixed cost in there that involved the setup as well as the initial setup of the Salesforce software that allows us to go through the contact tracing protocols. And I think I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's also important to point out here that the great majority of these expenditures we expect to be reimbursed for. So we've already had a conversation with Fort Bend County, and they have CARES Act funding that's available that will cover the majority, if not all, of those fixed costs. And then in addition to that, we have worked, and we expect that some of those costs will also be FEMA eligible for reimbursement. However, with FEMA costs, those are only reimbursed at a 75% rate. So the good news is there's a large portion of this that will be reimbursable. However, we do expect to have to absorb some of those costs as we go forward.
Okay, and then what's the term of this contract?
Again, it will expire on June 30th, 2021, so it will end at the end of this school year.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that information. Thank you very much.
Ms. Tassan?
Thank you. I just have one follow-up. Do you have an estimate of what we think the impact will be to our budget, and how do we plan to pay for that?
So as a reminder, and this will be in a presentation in November, so I don't want to take away too much of my own thunder. But if you recall, in the presentation that we did at the board meeting last week, we indicated that we were ending the fiscal year with 95 days of fund balance. That additional 5 days that's above our normal 90-day operating reserve is worth about $10 million. In addition to that, we have about $15 million that we set aside specifically for economic stabilization. So in total, we have a little over $25 million to deal with COVID-related expenditures, as well as any state revenue shortfall that would come our way out of the legislative session. So in short, that would be the funding source that we would potentially be utilizing. But I do want to emphasize as well, as we're looking at the initial first quarter expenditures, we're seeing that they are lower than what we expected. So there's also going to be some savings that will help offset a portion of those costs as well.
So we don't have an estimate at this time of what we think we're going to have to absorb?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hassan. Thank you so much for the presentation and the updates. We will now convene a closed session under Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, under the following sections, 551.071, for the purpose of a private consultation with the board's attorney on any or all subjects of matters authorized by law. We are now in closed session. to leave closed session, I just want to check our mics. Grail, can you speak, please? Just say something that you can hear us.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Addie. I can hear you.
All right, and Ms. Drew?
Thank you, Ms. Heiliger. I can hear you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we are now reconvene in open session. We will now consider action on closed session items. So I would like to call Mr. Jim Rice, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I move that the Board of Trustees approve Chris Nielsen to the position of Director of IT Support Services.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved in second. Do we have any further questions? All right, at this time we will vote. I got a thumbs up from Ms. James. Can I get a thumbs up or thumbs down from Ms. Drew? All right, we have a unanimous vote. That has passed. Congratulations on your new position. And is he here by any chance? No? No? Okay. Did it not? It didn't light up? Okay, through a show of hands, just confirm your vote, please. All right, thank you so much. All right, next we would deliberate over the discipline matters or complaints. First, we have the level 3 grievance for appeals. I think that goes to Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, I move that the Board of Trustees, pursuant to Board Policy FNG Local, assign the Level 3 grievance to Myra Schexnader, who will serve as the Board's designated hearing officer.
Second.
It's been properly moved in second. Do we have any questions? Hearing none, please vote.
There we go.
All right, thank you so much. It's unanimously passed. We have a second item.
Yes, let's see, I move that the Board of Trustees, pursuant to Board Policy FNG Local, assign the Level 3 grievance appeal of Timothy Gordon to Myra Schexnader, who will serve as the Board's designated hearing officer.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved in second. Do we have any questions? All right, at this time, I will call for a vote. Please vote. All right. It passes unanimously. All right, thank you. Do we have any other items in closed session that I may have missed? All right, thank you so much. Now I would like to hear from our board members' reports, our activity report. Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes, this month, board members attended the Touchdown Club of Houston's preseason team virtual event, superintendent formative evaluation, board policy committee meeting, pandemic stakeholder advisory committee meetings, TASB virtual conference, TASB virtual delegate assembly, board workshop, student leadership 101 session 2, 13th annual State of the Schools luncheon, Addie's book day virtual event, SHAC meeting, and regular board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. At this time, we'll go to special reports. I'm going to take a personal point of privilege here and just really wanted to say congratulations again to our own Mr. Jim Rice for representing us very well in TASB and for being a leader in our district. And we are so very proud of you for becoming president of Texas Association of School Boards. And so we just wanted to say thank you for your leadership in this county, in this district, and now with the state. Thank you so much. Congratulations. I also wanted to say, I give a special thanks. As you all know, it's October, and I celebrate my birthday all month, but We just completed Addie's Book Day on last Friday, and I would like to say thank you to Collaborative Communities, Dr. Indelicato, and Ms. Tynice Blackman for all the work that they did to make that very special event. We reimagined, like we're doing right now with our district, we reimagined that Addie's Book Day to become a really special virtual event, and it actually has really it exceeded all my expectations. We were able to give out 1,100 books to students at Burton Elementary School, which each student having the ability to get 3 books, brand new books, taken home so they can add or start their own personal library. So I just wanted to say thanks again to all those who worked to make that day very special. Thank you to all those who bought books and sent them over to Burton Elementary School. So you all are much appreciated. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Ms. Helliger, for sharing your birthday every year with the students in Fort Bend ISD. I think it's become a special event.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any other special reports? All right, thank you. Now we'll go on to the consent agenda. Can I have a motion, please?
Madam President, I would like to pull consent agenda item A1 and move to approve the balance of the entire consent agenda, A2, 3, 4, B1, C1, D1, and 2, in its entirety as presented.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved and second. Do we have any questions, discussions? All right, hearing none, please vote. All right, that passes unanimously. Ms. Drew, do you have a question or statement? Okay, all right, thank you. All right, can I have a motion for item A1, please?
Madam President, I move to approve consent agenda item A1 as presented.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved in second. Do we have any questions or discussion on this item?
Yes, I said this last week at the agenda review, but this is the regular board meeting, and I think it bears repeating that on our comprehensive annual audit review, financial report, we received an unqualified or a clean rating from Whitley Penn, our CPA. That's the highest rating that we can receive for running a tight ship on our finances. In addition to that, this report is due in November, but we were able to get this done in October. So in spite of COVID, in spite of everything else, Mr. Gwynn, Ms. Kelly Shacks, and their team got all of this done, and I think it's really a testament to their leadership and hard work that once again Fort Bend ISD received a stellar rating in managing its finances. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or discussion?
If you don't mind, I would, Mr. Rice, I want to thank you for that acknowledgement. And just in my role as superintendent, it gives me great comfort and assurance to have a team like Brian and Kelly and Luis and Brenda who do such a remarkable job of managing the bottom line financially, but they always do it with an eye on our mission and of serving students. But their eye and attention to detail, nobody can top. And the work that they do to keep our books clean and these unqualified reports coming and coming and coming, I just want to express my appreciation for their support and their dedication and hard work as well. So thank you for that acknowledgement.
Good job. All right, at this time we vote, please. All right, everyone has voted. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So now we go to our action items. The first one on the list is A1, consider approval of the legislative priorities for the 87th Texas Legislative Session. Can I have a motion, please?
Yes, Ms. Kelliger, I move that the Board of Trustees approve the legislative priorities for the 87th Texas legislative session as presented.
Thank you. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. It's been properly moved and seconded. At this time, I'll open the floor up for questions or discussions.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Helliger. So as legislative liaison, I just wanted to say a few words about the two resolutions that we have for action this evening. I was able to meet with President Burdine and Dr. Indelicato and our Ms. Sofer and our entire team to discuss what our legislative priorities should be this year. For obvious reasons, they focus on funding. And we have heard from our legislators that they're going to be hyper-focused on budget and funding this coming legislative session. And we're not really sure what this session is going to look like, so we wanted to make sure that we were very focused in our ask. These priorities center around conversation that the board had during the formative evaluation and how we are going to be doing school in the future, and to ensure that we are allowing our students choice while being able to provide funding for those choices. So I want to be really clear that this is about the funding that we receive when students decide what educational model they will be part of. And so while I do not advocate for propping up the two systems that we have now, I'm not sure that anyone would, but we do have students that already attend a lot of online classes. We've discussed previously in the boardroom, especially around students in special education, but other students who attend internships, which are all part of our educational model, part of our CTE, part of our professional learning for our students, and we do not receive funding for these kinds of models, although our students want to be able to be a part of them. We want to be able to expand online opportunities for students who may need that, or for students who desire to have that. So that's what these resolutions center around, and ensuring that we receive funding for those options. So we want to keep taxpayer funds local. We want to keep them for Fort Bend ISD students, and we want our debt funds to be able to be spent a little more flexibly, as we discussed. For example, right now, debt financing cannot be utilized for most cloud-based technological expenditures, and we all know that this is a best practice and something that we've discussed in the past, wanting to be able to access, and we can't do that, so we have to spend it on infrastructure that may not be a best practice or may not be best for the district. So it's really a lot about local control and ensuring that the funding is received for our students, and that our taxpayer funds stay local within Fort Bend ISD. So I'm not gonna read the resolutions unless someone wants me to do that. They are in the packet, but I wanted to present that by way of background and foundation. And I know Dr. Indelicato and I are happy to take any questions that any of the board members might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hassan. Do we have any other discussions? All right, Mr. Rosenthal.
Just to just to follow up on that, Kristen, I guess what we're thinking about is, trying to think ahead and, post-pandemic, when students don't need to stay at home, because there are students that would learn better, through an online type of setup, and then we also have students that want to take classes that may not be available at their campus, and so we want to make sure we get full funding for those students, because especially when they're learning in a robust online environment that works for them. And so the model that we have now, that the state pays us for now, is we don't get paid. Again, I'm not talking about COVID times, but during regular times we don't get paid unless students are in their seats. And so we would like to have that option to be able to provide that choice and still get funding so that we can provide those choices.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's a great way to put it, Dave. And I think we should be able to provide our students those choices. I know we've talked about it a lot in the boardroom, and so we don't really have that flexibility right now because the state dictates it. And so, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tossan and Mr. Rosenthal. Ms. James, did you have a quick
thank
point?
you. I'm sorry, I spoke over you.
Okay, so do you have a point? Are you still need the mic?
I have a question.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So first of all, I'll say thank you, Mrs. Tossan and Mr. Burdine, for your work on all this. I appreciate you guys taking the time to get these written up. I thought I really like the ideas that you've put down here. I think that we absolutely can take some of our Fort Bend ISD Reimagined and build it into our choice for students. And as we've been saying all along, these new ideas and new ways of doing things, these innovations that we're having, we want to be able to carry into the future. So I think it's great to spend some energy advocating to the state for that. I also appreciate the debt using funding for cloud-based technologies. We've been hindered in the past by the technology solutions that we can use in some areas because of funding constraints. So I appreciate you guys putting this in a resolution, bringing this up. I think this is a good time to do that. It matches well with the other resolution, and finding solutions that are efficient and flexible as technology changes are important. So thank you for both those things. One thing that I didn't see here, and maybe you can speak to it, the committee may have looked into it. We talked a couple of weeks ago about STAR testing and what that might look like in the spring, and of course the labels and things that are associated with that. Did you guys discuss at all what how we might approach that with the state legislature?
Do you mean the labels, the A through F? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that's what I'm referring to. So I'm concerned if I'm fine with STAR being administered, but I'm concerned about, because it gives us a data point and I'm fine with that, but I'm concerned about the labels, especially since we're coming off of this pandemic. And we might, I don't know what the accuracy of those labels would be.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Your point's well taken. We did have some conversation around that, and we opted to, like I said, kind of be hyper-focused on the two resolutions that we have here, because we felt like funding was going to be such a big issue, and we wanted to see if we couldn't get some traction on these two things. I'm not opposed to taking board members' feedback if we want to expand. We just felt like that it was important to remain really focused on these two things, because the legislature has indicated, I know Mr. Rice has said this before, that they've indicated that they are not sure what this legislative session will look like, and that they were really going to be targeting budgeting issues. So that was the rationale for it, and we just opted to go with these two.
All right, and I think it fits. I agree, just bringing up what Ms. Rice has spoken about in the past. I agree that because of the other piece of it, I guess, is because of our position in terms of the compression and the hold harmless that we had for this biennium. It's hard to know what will happen going forward and if that will be continued. And And did we discuss that at all in terms of funding and financing, if we should be, how we would go about advocating our situation, for our situation in regard to the compression funding, hold harmless?
We didn't discuss that specifically whenever we met. I do think that it's something that we need to, that is maybe more Fort Bend ISD specific. And it's certainly something that we can, I guess the way I think about organizing these things is we have our two maybe big asks or big pushes, and then we have a couple of Fort Bend ISD specific things. And that certainly can be added to the list. And it, of course, that has to do with funding as well. So when Veronica and her team work on putting together the graphics that are going to be based off of these resolutions, we can add those things like that that are specific to Fort Bend ISD to be part of that.
Okay, I think that's a great way to do it, and then hopefully we can get some regional support over the resolutions, and then we've got a couple of specific Fort Bend ISD points that might that we can add on there, and maybe as far as the STAR testing goes, we can maybe hold the thought on that and see where that see what things look like in a couple of months, or how the conversation goes. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and we expect Raise Your Hand Texas and TASB and TASA to take up STAR, and so I guess, and so that's definitely going to be something that's pushed, and I think it's something that we should get behind as a board. But again, these were just these were the two things that we felt like, okay, what are our top two, and let's not get too broad. So that's what we opted for.
Okay, that sounds good. Did TASB, has TASB, or will they be publishing a legislative agenda? Or I'm sure one was approved at the delegate assembly, but I'm not familiar with it.
Yes, they have done that, and I will send it to Dr. Dupree so he can share it with the entire board.
Great, thank you. That's the end of my questions.
Oh, thank you. I just had a quick point. I think the reason why, if I understand correctly, that we selected these two is because some of those other things that you mentioned, Ms. James mentioned, are being carried by so many other groups and organizations, and we wanted to make sure that we were hyper, I guess, sensitive to the things that we needed more focus on, and that's why we selected the two areas for us to support.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that characterizes it well.
Yeah. Thanks. Mr. Rosenthal?
I think, again, the focus is, you said it, local control, whereas the other things are more, maybe broad-based. Mm-hmm. This is really about local control. And it's when you said that, I was also thinking of, especially since it concerns finance, is when we did we have our first audit. Mr. Gwynn, you might be able to remind me of this, but you know how we get dinged because we're funding bond using commercial paper, which actually saves taxpayers millions and millions of dollars, but yet we get dinged on it. So again, if fund us and let us use our money responsibly, the way we think it should be used. It's local control. So.
All right, thank you. I call for the vote. I got that look from Mr. Rice. Call for the vote, please. All right, it passes unanimously. Our next action on the board agenda is consider approval of a resolution rescinding the emergency authority granted to the superintendent regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Ms. Tassan.
Yes, Madam Vice President, I move that the Board of Trustees rescind the emergency authority granted to the superintendent regarding the COVID-19 pandemic effective October 19th, 2020.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Can any discussions or questions? All right, at this time, please vote. All right, right, this motion passes unanimously. All right, Dr. Dupree, let's review the future board meeting agenda items.
Yes, ma'am. Next Wednesday, on the 28th, the board will conduct the superintendent's annual summative evaluation. November, the big updates that are going to be the student achievement update, as we heard us talk to tonight. It's going to be more specific details. Quarterly financial update will take place, and that'll be a very thorough financial update as well, where we're going to introduce the idea of perhaps even a TRE for the next biennium. So that'll be a robust conversation. We don't have it on the list, but as you know, there is a November board election, and so the results of that election will be canvassed at a date in November, sometime on the 9th or following, once the county is able to finalize the election results. And then, of course, as is a usual pattern, the board will swear in elected officials and appoint officers for the period to follow. December, we'll be doing the annual first rating, the Financial Integrity Rating System of Texas report, and we'll consider action on the evaluation documents, the superintendent's evaluation for the 2021 year, as well as district and campus performance objectives. You'll note that this is a couple of months, or at least a month or two later than usual, just based on everything else we have pulled back on planning to keep that off the principal's desk so that they can keep focusing on transitioning. But we'll be bringing that to the board in December for consideration. And then January, we'll have more academic reports in terms of our annual taper. Well, I'm not sure what that's going to look like since there was no state star, but we'll see. There'll be more academic updating, including updates on the Early Literacy Center and Pre-K expansion, and Special Education and Early Intervention Academy. It's possible we will have the school year calendar for the 2021 for approval in January as well. And as we discussed earlier, if staff believes we want to recommend any revisions to the current year calendar, those would come forth in either November or December as well. And then in January, the president has asked us to identify a date for team building for the board to really, and part of the work, just so as the board starts thinking about that, we've talked a lot about reimagining education in Fort Bend. We just think, I mean, I know from the staff perspective, as you're going to see in our strategic planning work, we're really, I'm not going to say we're at ground zero, but we are at a place where a lot of the things we had been visioning are going to need to change substantially in light of new data, new information, kind of where we are organizationally. So I think the board is going to really be able to enjoy a robust planning opportunity and team building opportunity in January to kind of reset our vision for the future. And that concludes my report.
All right, thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
I move.
I have a question.
Never mind. I rescind that.
Yes, Ms. James.
Sorry about that. I'm eager to be finished as well. But I do have something that came up. There was a couple of things, Dr. Dupree, on the frequently asked questions for the Pandemic Stakeholder Advisory Committee that were, it was listed that they were going to be addressed at this meeting, and I don't know that they were. So I'm just mentioning that so that somebody can follow up and check on that.
All righty, I'll have Anthony follow up on that since he took the notes from that meeting.
Yes, Ms. James, can you send that to Dr. Dupree? Whatever the follow-up was
Yeah,
going to be.
it's in the frequently asked questions from October 8th is where the information is, but I can send that, sure.
Okay. All right, any other questions about the agenda? All right, this has been moved and seconded.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Second.
We are now adjourned. Thank you.
Good job, Madam Vice President.